Here in Chapter 1, we are going to be introducing a lot of terms that we will be using throughout the semester. There will be a lot of repetition between what we're talking about here, your assignments that you'll have for the lecture part and for lab as well. So hopefully with all this repetition, you'll start to get a good foundation. First of all, just definitions. So anatomy and physiology, of course, the course that you are in. Anatomy is looking at the structure. So we're looking at size, shape of a bone, what a muscle looks like. Physiology, though, is the function. So structure and function, name of the game whenever it comes to the body. So the structure part is the anatomy, how it works, why it doesn't work, what makes it work. That's the physiology. So a few more parts. So gross anatomy is anything without a microscope. So micro, of course, meaning something we can't see with the naked eye. So gross anatomy is what we can see visually. We can see this regionally throughout the body, so in different systems. We can just look at the surface. Of course, we can look under the surface, but then typically that gets into more complex techniques. And then the things that we need with a microscope are cytology. This is looking at cellular anatomy, and histology is looking at tissues. Now, how does all of this happen then? So there are quite a few things that we can use for imaging in anatomy. So some of these you've probably had done to you or are very familiar with. So x-rays, of course, we look at with bones. That's using electromagnetic radiation to expose the body structures on photographic plates. So using electromagnetic radiation, again, any kind of radiation can cause damage. So that's why only so many x-rays can be done in a given amount of time. And pregnant women should not receive x-rays at least to where the fetus could be exposed. Then ultrasounds, kind of back to that fetus, but not only for, of course, looking at fetal development, but these are using sound waves. So ultrasound helps us there a little bit. So this is using sound waves to either pass or bounce back to create that sonogram. Then a CT, which stands for computed tomography. This is using computer analyzed x-ray images. So just a little bit more advanced x-ray image using computers to analyze the information. Then a DSA, not quite as one that you may be as familiar with, but this is digital subtraction angiography. So this is similar to the CT, but it's using radiopaque dye. So instead of using the electromagnetic radiation, it's using a dye to enhance differences in an area. And then the last two, probably ones you have heard of, an MRI, which is magnetic resonance imaging. This is using radio waves directed while under an electromagnetic field. So kind of combining the electromagnetic that we talked about with x-rays, but also using radio waves. And those waves are what are collected and analyzed by the computer. And then a PT scan, positron emission tomography. This is now using radioactively labeled glucose. And this is looking at tissues to determine what is the metabolic state. So we're not looking here at a specific anatomy, but more kind of the function, getting back to the physiology. So especially looking for tumors that are more metabolically active and sucking up a lot of glucose can be detected on the PET scan. And then just looking at some different images that you would see. An X-ray, again, using that electromagnetic radiation to create the radiograph. The imaging, so ultrasound and more developed, so where these can be three-dimensional as well as two-dimensional. But again, here we're using those sound waves in order to create that image. The CT scan, again, here we're using x-rays, but a computer analyzed x-ray, still using those electromagnetic radiation. Then the DSA, again, digital subtraction angiogram. Again, just a little step beyond that CT. So it's using the same kind of x-ray electromagnetic radiation, but also adding a radiopaque dye so that we can look at contrast. Then the MRI, this is now using radio waves and the electromagnetic field. So this is, again, kind of more effective at detecting some forms of cancer than what can be seen with the CT scan. And then finally, your PET scan, the positron emission, this is now using, again, that radioactive glucose in order to look at the metabolic state. Right, so now if we get into, again, our structure function, now we're looking at the complexity. So we're going to be building and looking at cellular organization and how cells make tissues and organs and systems and all of that. So first of all, the very simplest level is the chemical level. And this is just how the atoms are coming together. So in chapter 2, we'll look more at the chemistry, but how these atoms come together to make proteins, DNA, carbohydrates, and these macromolecules. Then we move into the cellular level in which we have an actual functional unit. So this is the smallest living thing. Of course, in eukaryotic organisms, we also have organelles like mitochondria, the nucleus, and all of those. But prokaryotic cells like bacteria are still cells, they're still living, but no organelles. Then we move into the tissue level. So tissues are just groups of similar cells that are working together. So epithelial tissue, nervous tissue, for example, and we'll be looking at these throughout the semester. Then those tissues come together to form our organs, which are just functional units or tissues that are working together. So of course our brain, stomach, the bladder, made up of lots of different tissues. Each tissue made up of lots of different cells, cells made up of lots of different atoms and molecules. So if we look at some of the major organs of the body, and you're probably familiar with the majority of these. So of course we have the brain, our spinal cord, lungs, the heart and the liver, the gallbladder, which is a small kind of ball-like shape right underneath the liver, the pancreas that's in behind the stomach. So it's just kind of showing the stomach being translucent, which of course it isn't. Again, the kidneys for excretion, which are behind the intestines, our large intestines, then getting into our urinary system, the ureter and the urinary bladder to empty that urine. We also have the spleen there behind the stomach that helps with our immune system. Of course, our stomach for digestion, kidney on the other side, and then our small intestine. So our organs then come together to form organ systems. So these are, again, organs functioning together. So things like the urinary system, the nervous system. So we'll go through each of these. And then ultimately, they come together to form the organism, which is any living thing. And so some organisms, like an E. coli cell, the organism is just a cell. It doesn't have tissues, it doesn't have organs or organ systems, but it's still an organism. But for multi-celled organisms like us, most of them will have tissues, organs, and organ systems. So now if we look at each of these organ systems of the body, starting with the integumentary system, this is our protective layer, helps regulate with temperature, prevents water loss so that, again, water's not evaporating. It also helps produce vitamin D, so that's why we need sunlight. It helps in that conversion and that enzymatic process. So it's made up of our skin, hair, nails, and sweat glands. Then our skeletal system also provides that protection, but support, allows movement, produces blood cells, so our bone marrow, that is where our bone cells are being produced, and it can be used for storage. Consists of our bones, but also cartilage, ligaments, and joints make up the skeletal system as well. Then our muscular system, of course, movement also helps us to maintain our posture, and they're important in producing body heat. So whenever we're shivering or shaking, it's those muscles releasing heat that helps warm us up. And of course, made up of our muscles as well as the skeleton that it's attached to using those tendons. Then our nervous system, so major regulatory system, of course, it detects sensations, controls movements, controls physiological processes, of course, intellectual thoughts. So not only the brain, but also our spinal cord, nerves, and those sensory receptors. Then our endocrine system, another regulatory system. So the nervous system, more control center. Endocrine is more regulatory. So it influences our metabolism and growth and many other functions as far as when to turn them on, turn them off, kind of where to set them at. So this includes a lot of different glands, like the pituitary gland that secretes various hormones like insulin to control our blood glucose levels. Then our cardiovascular system, it's transporting nutrients, also though getting rid of waste, gases, and it distributes hormones throughout the body, helps with the immune system as well, and helps with regulating body temperature. And that one's made up of our heart, blood vessels, and our blood. Then our lymphatic system, this goes kind of right along with our circulatory system, but its job is more part of our immune system. It's removing foreign substances from the blood and the lymph, helps us combat disease, also helps with fluid balance, so regulating our water balance, absorbs fat from the digestive tract as well. And it's made up of those lymphatic vesicles that essentially kind of parallel or go right along with our cardiovascular vessels, like our arteries and veins, but also lymph nodes and lymphatic organs like the spleen. And again, especially with lymph nodes, thinking about cancer, typically lymph nodes in the area of a tumor are checked whenever biopsies are done or whenever tumors are being removed to see if the cancer is metastasized and maybe spreading. It's those lymph nodes because once it gets to the lymph, just like the cardiovascular system, it gains access to the rest of the body. Then our respiratory system, of course, our breathing. So it exchanges oxygen and carbon dioxide between the blood and the air, and also helps regulate pH, and is made up of our lungs and those respiratory passages like our pharynx, our throat, the trachea, and our nasal cavity. Then our digestive system, so the process of mechanical, so chomping up, chewing our food, as well as chemical, so enzymes that are released to break down food, but also to absorb those nutrients and get rid of waste, consists of the mouth, the esophagus, down to the stomach, the large and small intestine, and the accessory organs like the liver and the gallbladder. Our urinary system, this is going to remove our waste, also helps regulate blood pH, helps with ion balance and water balance. It's made up of our kidneys, the bladder, and then the ducts like the urethra and the ureter that carry the urine. Right, then our reproductive system here. So this is, of course, used in sexual reproduction, so fertilization and fetal development. Also in women, thinking about milk production for the newborn and hormones that influence sexual functions and behaviors. Includes in the female, ovaries, the vagina, uterus, mammary glands, thinking about the milk production and associated structures. Then in the male, reproductive, again, similar, still involved in sexual reproduction. So similar to that in females, also producing hormones. Again, here we are, the male reproductive consists of the testes, accessory structures like the vas deferens, the prostate gland, and the penis.